Here's what nobody talks about. The Chevy Silverado's crew cab outsells every other full-size configuration on dealer lots, and there's a reason GM's T1 platform gives you an independent rear suspension option that Ford still doesn't offer on the F-150. That means better ride, better handling with a loaded bed, and a lower floor for cargo. Ford sells more units total, sure, but that's brand inertia from fleet contracts and rental companies padding the numbers strip out commercial fleet sales and the retail gap shrinks dramatically. The Duramax diesel and the 6.2L V8 both outlast Ford's EcoBoost turbos long term. Because turbochargers are failure points past 150,000 miles, and truck buyers keep their rigs longer than car buyers. I'd love to hear someone defend Ford's strategy of bolting turbos onto smaller engines and calling it innovation.
The turbo argument is exactly backwards. Ford put the 2.7 and 3.5 EcoBoost in the F-150 because aluminum body plus turbocharged V6 means you're hauling the same payload while getting 20 miles per gallon highway. And that's not a gimmick, that's physics. The F-150 went aluminum in 2015 and shed 700 pounds. That weight savings alone offsets the complexity of a turbo. On the durability question, the 3.5 EcoBoost has been in production since 2011. There are documented examples with 300,000 plus miles, and Ford's own Police Interceptor fleet, which is the most brutal real-world durability test that exists, runs EcoBoost engines into the ground. The IRS point on the Silverado sounds impressive until you realize most F-150 buyers tow and haul, and a solid rear axle is actually more robust under load. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Ford's aluminum body from 2015 isn't some gimmick GPT. It dropped 700 pounds and turned those EcoBoost turbos into torque monsters that match any Duramax tow without the dead weight. And those 300K mile cop fleet examples prove the turbos outlast the hype about 150K failures. Solid rear axle beats IRS every time you actually load the bed or yank a trailer because it doesn't squat or flex like GM's optional setup that most Silverado buyers skip anyway. Fleets aren't distorting sales. They're voting with their wallets for the truck that keeps working cheapest over 1 million miles of real abuse.
Fleets don't vote with their wallets for the best truck. They vote for the biggest discount, and Ford's fleet incentive programs are legendarily aggressive. GM's fleet share is lower, partly because they protect retail margins instead of dumping units at cost plus into enterprise lots. Now, on the solid axle point, you're describing a scenario where you're towing at max capacity, but the median F-150 buyer tows maybe twice a year. The rest of the time, that solid axle is giving them a worse ride over every pothole and speed bump on their daily commute. The IRS on a Silverado High Country makes it drive like a vehicle from this decade rather than 1985. And that's why J.D. Power's 2023 appeals study ranked the Silverado above the F-150 in driving experience. If your best argument for Ford is that it's tougher under a load, most owners never actually put on it, you're conceding the truck Chevy buyers actually live with every day is the better one.
The J.D. Power APL study measures how much owners like their truck emotionally. It's a satisfaction survey, not a stopwatch or a dyno test. That's not durability data, that's vibes. Meanwhile, here's something concrete. Ford sold over 750,000 F-150s in 2023, and even if you dock 30% for fleet, that's still 525,000 retail buyers choosing the F-150 over the Silverado with their own money. On the IRS point, yes, it rides nicer empty, but the reason serious truck people have used solid rear axles since trucks existed is load stability. When you put 1,500 pounds in that bed, IRS geometry changes, bushings compress unevenly, and you get handling that's less predictable than a simple beam axle that just sits there doing its job. The drives like a car selling point is exactly backwards for a work truck. The whole point is it shouldn't drive like a car when it's loaded.
GPT, your recycled pitch for Chevy's IRS and Big and A Mills crumbles when you look at how Ford's aluminum F-150s have been crushing 200,000-mile fleet duty cycles in police and taxi fleets where every downtime dollar counts. Those 3.5 EcoBoosts aren't fragile toys. They're piling up 300K plus miles with fewer oil consumption issues than GM cylinder deactivation disasters because the turbo only works when you ask it to. Solid axle keeps the truck stable and predictable when the bed's loaded with actual payload instead of floating like a crossover on IRS, which is exactly why the guys who buy trucks for profit, not magazine test drives, keep choosing Ford by the hundreds of thousands every year.